about the sun. In particular, the sun miracle of Fatima. Some of you may have read some of my blog posts on that. If so, you will be familiar with the first half of this presentation. The second half will hopefully be new. If you haven't read them, buckle up. So, 1917, Portugal. Couple of children claim to have seen the Virgin Mary. The Virgin tells them that she will appear to them every month for 6 months, and at the end of the 6 months, she will perform a great miracle. So for 6 months, the Virgin appears to them once a month. This is a very Catholic area during a very Catholic period, so many people come to see this miracle. To everyone else, it looks like the children are talking to the empty air, but the children seem to be very excitedly and devotedly talking to the empty air, and there are some minor miracles reported in the vicinity. So every month, more and more people gather. And at the end of these 6 months, when the great miracle is expected, 100,000 people descend on this tiny village to see what will happen. It is a very rainy day. Everybody is sopping wet. By noon, the clouds very briefly part. The sun is visible through a tiny window in the sky. And according to these 100,000 people who were there, the sun suddenly grows pale so that you can stare at it completely painlessly. People look at it. It begins to spin around, change color, shoot off sparks, possibly move around the sky. It starts to change color so dramatically that everything in the world changes color. So when the sun is blue, you can look around and it looks like you're viewing the world through blue glasses. Everything around is blue. And then after about 10 minutes of that, the sun suddenly flares up to its normal brightness. The miracle is over. So, when I first heard about this, I was pretty shocked. Usually if you look into the paranormal, you find that, graphing things on two axes, weirdness if true, convincingness. Usually there are a couple things that are pretty convincing, like ball lightning, where they're just not that weird. Like, sure, okay, lightning can be in balls, fine. There are some things that are very weird, like ESP, but the evidence for them isn't very good. The studies don't replicate. It's just a couple of people with anecdotes. This sun miracle of Fatima was the first thing I found that seems to be in this top right corner of the chart. You have 100,000 people saying that they saw it. Of those, about 100 people gave very well-recorded testimony to experts or to investigators. Of the 100 people who we got testimony from, about 98% said that they saw it. I was able to find 2 records of people who said, written down, that they did not see it. Even those 2 people said that everyone around them seemed to be seeing it. There were journalists there. There were photographers there. You cannot really take a photograph directly of the sun with a 1917 camera, but the photographers did record many people looking around, pointing at the sky, looking up at the sky, looking very impressed. So clearly something was going on here. And of course, these photos were published in the newspaper the next day. The journalists who were there, including atheist journalists, claimed to have seen the same thing. So not really that easy to explain. I got a bit obsessed with this for the past 6 months, during which time I was able to look into all of the explanations which have been proposed so far and which definitely do not work. So going through them in order. Sundogs. Cool meteorological phenomenon, sun refracting through ice crystals, makes a halo around the sun, does not really make the sun change color, does not make it spin, does not change the colors of everything in the world around you, does not make the sun move. Aureoles, different kind of ice crystal phenomenon. This one has a little bit of color, otherwise it's the same thing. And also, all these meteorological phenomena are quite rare, and it would be surprising if one of them happened at the exact day that was prophesied by a group of child seers 6 months before. Aurora borealis, at this time of year, at this time of day, localized entirely to one small town in Portugal. Afterimages. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So, if you stare at the sun, you will get an after image as it injures your eyes. Then if you look away, maybe it will seem slightly pinkish or purplish. This could theoretically explain why people saw weird color changes. You can imagine maybe they look at the sun and then they look away, and then there's this sun-shaped afterimage, so they feel like the sun is moving. Fine. I guess the problem is it requires everyone in Portugal to be holding the idiot ball. Like, okay, you've seen after images. If 100,000 people stared at the sun and got an after image, they would not be writing reports about miracles in the newspaper the next day. So kind of promising, we probably need something else to explain some of the more exciting phenomena. Mass hallucinations. I don't think this is real. We all know this term. It's a famous term. We're all like, oh yeah, mass hallucination. But when I try to look into examples, there aren't that many. I said none previously. The audience was able to think of one example in all of history of something matching a mass hallucination. Otherwise, it's all psychosomatic diseases. If one person claims to have a psychosomatic disease, often the people around them will catch that psychosomatic disease. That's pretty interesting. It's the classic example of mass hallucination, but it's clearly not everyone in a crowd of 100,000 people just suddenly coordinatedly sees the sun spinning around the sky. Fire-kashina meditation. This is a Buddhist thing where some Buddhist meditators are able to stare at a light, typically a candle flame, meditate on the afterimage, and after a while, the afterimage will take on a life of its own and do some weird things. It's a pretty good match for some of the things people saw at Fatima, except that usually you have to be like a pretty experienced meditator, months if not years of meditation practice. You have to be staring at this lamp very intently for minutes and like trying to clear your mind. And everyone in Fatima just kind of looked up and saw this. So I don't think this works either. God. This is the one we are sort of trying to talk around or avoid. I'll admit my bias is here. I am atheist of Jewish descent. It would be awkward for me if the Virgin Mary performed a miracle. But I think that we can also get some actual evidence against this one. And the best evidence is the repeats. So Fatima was the first time anything like this ever happened. Since then, it has happened again. One case is this town of Nessida, Wisconsin. Woman claimed to have seen the Virgin Mary. Woman actually claimed to have seen many things, including the ghost of Abraham Lincoln and evidence for some kind of Freemasonic conspiracy to take over America. But people were like, oh, the Virgin Mary, we like that one. So a group of tens of thousands of pilgrims came to her house to see her talk with the Virgin, and some of them saw a sun miracle, kind of similar to Fatima. This one we don't have as good evidence, but there are like 2 or 3 stories of people seeing it. Dhammakaya Temple. This is a Buddhist megachurch in Bangkok, Thailand. In 1998, 20,000 people gathered there to celebrate the founder of this temple. And during that time, some of them seemed to have seen an image of him in the sky, followed by a sun miracle that was very, very similar to Fatima. All the same things: sun turns pale, sun starts spinning, sun changes color. So, I don't know, you could say that God still loves Buddhists, God still loves weird spiritualist frauds, but there's one group we know God does not love, and that is Redditors. And on the Our Sun Gazing subreddit, this is like a group for people who have this spiritual practice of staring at the sun in order to gain vital energy or something. It's great because like every 3rd post is, help, I went blind. And then all of the comments are like, LOL, me too. But some of the other posts are, I was staring at the sun, as usual, as I do, and suddenly it started changing colors and like flames were shooting out of it, and it was very strange. So even these people who are doing this kind of not really for the right reasons are seeing some very similar things, and some of them stare at the sun every day, and some of them see this like multiple times. So it seems to be something that happens if you stare at the sun enough. And there's one more example of it happening multiple times in the same place. That is this town of Medjugorje in Bosnia. So 1981, some children there claimed to have seen a vision of the Virgin Mary, as you do. The Virgin said that she would appear to them regularly thereafter. And to two of the children, she has appeared to them every day since 1981. Those children are now fully grown adults, still live in this town. The Virgin Mary still appears to them. It has become a great center of Catholic pilgrimage, and many of those pilgrims claim to have seen the sun miracle when they go there. How many? I don't know. If you Google this online, you can find lots of testimonials by people who say they've seen it. If you search it on YouTube, you can find documentaries by people who just go around with video cameras, see people staring at the sun, say, hey, are you witnessing a miracle? The people say yes. The camera can never capture the miracle, but the people seem very excited. There's a guy, Father Dwight Longenecker, who runs a religious blog. I can't even remember what denomination anymore, but I used to read him, and he went to Fatima, and he saw this miracle. So it's probably partly selection bias. I'm sure not everyone who goes there sees it, but it doesn't seem to be that much bias. It seems to happen quite regularly. I was shocked to hear that there was just this town where many of the people who go there quite often see miracles, and that like people who want to go on vacation were still going to Paris or Bali or somewhere instead of the town where you go and just see a miracle. So relatedly, I had some vacation time coming up. So I will be talking about my trip to Medjugorje this April. This is my wife, who also came with me. Get you a woman who will go along with your harebrained schemes to see miracles. So first, some backstory. This is a great book. It's by Mirjana Soldo, who was one of the children who the Virgin Mary appeared to. She tells her story. She was a normal child growing up in Sarajevo, not even that religious. Went to Medjugorje every summer to see relatives there. When she was 16 years old, she went to this town as usual to see her relatives. She was taking a walk. She saw this strange, luminous, ghostly figure on a hill at night. So she did what any of us would do and ran away. But she also told people in the town. And the people in this town, for whatever reason, were like, all right, we're all going to go to this hill the next night to see if we can spot this ghost. So like these, I don't know, 100 people went to this hill to look for this ghost, and of them, 6, all of whom were young people, children or teenagers, the next night they just immediately saw it and ran up the hill to see what was happening. Meanwhile, everyone else was like, we don't see anything, what's going on? These 6 people all saw the same figure, woman dressed in blue. They ran up, they talked to her. She said she was the Virgin Mary. She was bringing a message of peace and love. She would continue to return to this town. She would continue to speak with these children. And she did. Some of the children talked to her monthly or yearly, others daily. But she continued appearing to this town. She said that the town had some role in her plans. It became a great center of Catholic pilgrimage. She spends much of the book recommending that you go. She describes it as this beautiful farming village that still sticks to the old ways and traditions, full of normal people where men are real men and women are real women, and where you can just turn a corner and encounter the Virgin Mary. So it all sounded very excited, and I was psyched to go. And I got there, and I turned a corner, and there she was, the Virgin Mary. And then I turned another corner, and there she was again. And then I turned a third corner. And turns out that it is no longer this simple farming village. It is a giant Virgin Mary-themed Disneyland, approximately 90% souvenir shops by weight at this point. What isn't souvenir shops is hotels. All the hotels have these names like Villa Hotel Grace or Villa Regina, or are named after angels or named after popes, to the point where as a Jewish atheist, I was kind of in despair that I would find anywhere suitable for me to stay. Okay, well, there we go. So we got there, we got in our hotel, and the first step in my plan was to take a survey. Because again, all we have are these very selection-biased stories of people who say they saw miracles. Seems like the right thing to do would be to just go up to pilgrims there, get a random sample, ask, hey, have you seen any miracles? If so, what? And what I actually wanted to do was survey these pilgrims, ask how many days they'd been there, how many miracles they'd seen, try to plot some kind of survival analysis of how many days you go before you see your first miracle, and then also talk to the town residents. Because like if the town residents have been there 20 years and the tourists who are there for a week see a miracle, presumably these residents should have seen thousands of miracles. I was guessing that wasn't true, but I wanted to see for sure. So I set up shop with my notebook on a bench just outside the main thoroughfare. I took my survey, and here are the results. Bosnians really do not like being accosted by Americans and asked to take surveys. This was a very strong result. P is less than 0.00001. I feel like I've really proven my point here. Unfortunately, this was not helpful for my data gathering project. I was able to get 3 responses. One of them was a guy who had been there 2 or 3 days. He had not seen any miracles himself, but he said his grandmother was a serial pilgrim to Medjugorje, had taken 9 trips. On her 9th trip, she saw an image of the Virgin Mary in the sky, but it was not the sun. One other person said they had lived there 20 years. They had never seen anything themselves, but they heard this large commotion at one point and saw a woman walking by and were told that she had been like paralyzed on crutches, unable to walk for years, and had gone to one of the places to pray and then been miraculously healed. That was what I got from my 3 responses, not that useful. So obviously the next step was to try to see something myself. So I went up to this place, Apparition Hill, which is where people often see the miracles. I stayed there for a while. I stared at the sun for an inadvisable length of time, and I did not see anything. So, like anybody would do, I Google miracle viewing tips Medjugorje, and the Google response agent bot said that many people say they see miracles at 6:40 p.m., which is the time that the Virgin usually appears to these 2 children who are still seeing her. So I think, great. I'm going to go to the field behind the church at 6:40 p.m. and see what I can see. And my wife, who had been kind of struck with a cold the first day of the trip, was now recovered, and she was going to come with me. And I was excited about this, not just because I like having her with me, but because I had a kind of evil plot. And the evil plot was, if you look at these YouTube documentaries, everyone in a large group is seeing the miracle at the same time. This would sort of suggest that it's some kind of objective meteorological phenomenon and not just like a personal hallucination. But I'd talked to this person who'd been in the town 20 years, and she'd never seen it, which suggests it's got to be this hallucination and not an objective meteorological phenomenon. So my thought was, okay, only thing that makes sense now is that it is a hallucination, but there's like this extreme element of suggestibility. If you tell someone you're seeing it, then they see it right away. So my plan was I was going to tap my wife on the shoulder and be, look, the miracle! And then she would be suggested, and we would see if she saw it or not, and we would test this theory. Problem with this is I'm a very bad liar. And also, I hate lying, and also, I just get really nervous at the thought of it. So we were in this field, 6:30 something. I'm like, okay, 1 minute now, I'm going to tap my wife on the shoulder and say, look, a miracle. And 1 minute. Okay, so I didn't do it that time. But now, 1 minute from this time, I'm definitely going to tap my wife on the shoulder and say, look, a miracle. And I basically just worked myself up the courage to do this when my wife tapped me on the shoulder and said, look, the miracle! So, she was quite serious. She told me that the sun had suddenly gone pale and she could stare at it without any discomfort. She said that it was flashing colors like purple and yellow. And she said that it was not spinning, but it was flashing or strobing. We actually measured the rate. It was 10 hertz between black and white. And this continued for about 30 seconds, after which she suddenly said, after which the sun went back to its normal brightness, and then she suddenly said, ouch, ouch, my eyes, and she was crying, and she had a blind spot in her vision. Luckily, I had been spending the past 6 months reading about Medjugorje-induced retinal injuries, so I was able to tell her that her particular problem would go away in a few minutes, which it did. After which she immediately tried staring again and saw the same thing. So I had obviously been looking at the sun through this time, trying to see if I could see it, and the answer was mostly no, but slightly yes. Like, the sun was, so I have a picture. This is actually a picture from just before, because I knew I was going to do this, so I took a picture beforehand. The pictures during looked pretty similar, but came out a bit less well, but like there's nothing special about the pictures during. It looked the same. So this is just a picture of the conditions. As you can see, the sun is behind some very, very light cirrus clouds. It's kind of diffuse. The area that is bright in that picture is bigger than the area that was actually occupied by the sun. So I was looking at this, and it was pretty strange the way the clouds were diffusing the sun. Kind of made it hard to figure out the boundaries between the sun and everything else. After images were behaving in a weird way, kind of trying to find the border between the image and the after. Armed with this, which was kind of this triangulation, one person who had seen the miracle, one person who mostly hadn't and had just been observing the conditions around it, we spent a lot of the rest of that day and the rest of our vacation trying to come up with some theories for what was going on, which will now be the rest of this talk. So, first part of my theory. You get the miracle, you have the sun around 10,000 nits against a 20,000 lux background. You don't need to know these particular physical measures of luminance. The point I'm trying to make is that the sun is in a very narrow window of brightness between so bright that you cannot stare at it and you will just be in so much pain that you'll immediately look away, and so dim that it doesn't damage your eyes. And my claim is that in between these two levels, there is a narrow level where it feels like it is not damaging your eyes, but actually it is. Second part of this is against a 20,000 lux background. So that means brighter than the normal sky. Why would you get a sky brighter than the normal sky? If there are very bright white clouds right next to the sun, then those catch some of the sun rays and are extremely bright. Some of you may remember that if you stare at a cloud too long and the cloud is close to the sun, that's kind of like staring at the sun in the sense that it's too bright to look at. So my claim is that these very bright clouds all around the sun do two things. First of all, they make the sun look less bright than it is because you view bright contrast. If the sun is bright on a background of things that's almost equally bright, then it looks like the sun is not bright. So that's contributing to this same effect where it seems like the sun is dim, but actually it's bright. Would you prefer I take that mic? Thank you. Second thing that it does is make it very difficult for your brain to come up with the boundary between the sun and not the sun. There's a lot of work in the optical illusion literature on this filling in phenomenon where your eyes have spotted some splotch of color. They want to figure out what area the color goes to, and so they try to do a edge detection shape analysis. When this fails, they can do some odd things. So, moving forward. Step 2, negative after image superimposed upon the positive image. When you stare at the sun, you get an after image. Usually this is pretty noticeable and not that interesting. My claim is, if you are staring at the sun for a long time because the sun doesn't feel like it's painful to stare at, and also you think there might be a miracle going on, then the after image is exactly on top of the regular sun. And what this looks like is not naturally there's an after image, but the sun is changing color. After images change color. The exact sequence of colors they change to is different from person to person. This is a phenomenon called the flight of colors. And in fact, you can look at what colors every optical scientist said this goes through, and they're all different. Why are they all different? It seems to be a genetic thing. The sun damages the color cells in your eyes, but different people have different levels of each color cell. Maybe the color cells have different levels of resilience. For whatever reason, they damage these cells in a different order. So some people see bright, then purple, then blue, then dark. Some people see blue, then green, then red, then blue. And it fascinated me when I figured this out, because one thing you realize when you read all of the reports from Fatima is that everyone saw the sun change color, but everyone saw completely different colors. So I think this is a good match. So you're seeing the sun change color, but your eyes move a couple of degrees over the course of a second, just because the muscles aren't precise enough to keep the exact same focal point. You don't usually notice this because, number one, your brain corrects for it. Number two, as soon as your brain notices, it snaps back to your focal point. So you're concentrating on my little black object here. Your eyes are drifting a tiny bit, snapping back, drifting a tiny bit, snapping back. So over the course of a second, let's say this has happened 3 or 4 times, you're going a specific length from your focal point and then snapping back. So the space of areas that have been within the fovea, the center of your vision, is all spaces within a certain length of a central point. That's a circle. So what this looks like when you have an after image is that the after image is gradually drifting in a circular way around the focal point. If the after image is colored, what you get is a colored halo around a central point. In this picture, the central point is black because often if you stare straight at the sun, it exhausts all of the cells in your eye and you just see blackness. A couple of people at Fatima reported seeing the sun turn black. My wife reported seeing the sun strobe between black and white, which is another thing that can happen. It could be because one eye is completely exhausted, but the other isn't. And so that eye is seeing black, the other eye is seeing the correct white color of the sun. And when you get superimposed stereoscopic images from each eye, then your brain sort of strobes between them sometimes. So I think this may be responsible for some of the discussion of a colored halo around the sun. Why does the colored halo appear to spin? I don't know. This is one of the parts that I couldn't figure out. The colored halo is behaving in a very kind of seething, erratic, chaotic fashion, because it's going through this flight of colors, which usually happens over the course of less than a second. So every part of the halo is a different age because it's part of a different saccade. So you have these colors that are shifting very quickly in kind of an incomprehensible pattern. And when there is a circular thing in your vision behaving chaotically, sometimes the brain rounds this off to rotation. This is a famous optical illusion of weird circles. Some of you may find that if you're looking across it, the circles appear to be rotating. Other people may not notice that. I'm not really sure about this one. This is probably the weakest point in my theory. Finally, after you've been staring at the sun long enough, you get something called ultraviolet chromatopsia. This is a condition where your vision changes to be entirely one color. It is most common in snow blindness. This is where it's a very sunny day, there's lots of snow on the ground, the snow is reflecting the sunlight straight into your eyes, and if you're out walking for like an hour or two, you may get this condition called snow blindness, where the ultraviolet light has damaged your eyes, and sometimes the way this presents is that your entire vision turns a particular color. For example, everything is red, or everything is purple. This is a pretty good match for the last part of the miracle, where people say that the whole world seemed like they were looking through stained glass. I got a couple quotes down here from Fatima witnesses. The light turned a beautiful blue, as if it had come through the stained glass windows of a cathedral, spread itself over the people. The blue faded slowly, then the light seemed to pass through yellow glass. Yellow stains fell against white handkerchiefs, against the dark skirts of the woman, repeated on the trees, the stones, and the terrain. This is from a newspaper report of the miracle. This other guy, Antonio de Paula, taking his eyes off the sun, he saw the people a very bright red color, and he exclaimed, "Gentlemen, how the people are all red." The priest replied, "Are they wearing red scarves?" To which he remarked, "How can that be? Everyone agreed to have red scarves on their backs." Then the people appeared the color of gold. So I think this is a better match for ultraviolet chromatopsia, especially in this group of people who had just been staring at the sun for 10 minutes. There is one problem with this, which is that the usual form of this chromatopsia, as seen in snow blindness, takes about a couple of hours to come on, lasts for about a couple of hours, and is usually one color. The Fatima reports took about 10 minutes to come on, lasted about a minute, and shifted through all these different colors. I don't know. There are actually no reports of ultraviolet chromatopsia from staring directly at the sun, probably because outside of this one case, nobody has ever stared directly at the sun for 10 minutes, because why would you do that? So my guess is that this is like a different kind of or dose response curve of damage. You're not just getting it reflected secondhand from the snow over hours, you're getting it straight from the sun over minutes, and possibly this is a different form of ultraviolet chromatopsia that only lasts a few minutes before your eyes are able to recover, and which goes through the flight of colors. Again, all of these reports have different colors. The Odia report said it started blue, then it became yellow, and this Dipola guy said it started red, then it became yellow, or then it became golden. And you can find like 10 or 20 reports, all of which have a different set of colors here. So I think that's another good match for this flight of colors phenomenon. Things I cannot explain about the miracle, still, even having this theory. Number one, there was a claim that during Fatima, they saw the sun through a cloudless sky. I want to specify cloudless sky. It had been raining all day. There were actually a very large number of very dark clouds in the sky. The point was that this window opened in the clouds, and the sun was seen directly rather than being blocked by light clouds like it was in my photo. This would theoretically be more miraculous, because in my photo, it was sunset, it was seen through light clouds. It's not that surprising that it's possible to stare at the sun for a few seconds without immediately going blind or staring away. Fatima was at midday, supposedly seen through no clouds, so in theory it should be basically impossible to stare at the sun for too long. You guys have the sun up here, you can test it. If you look at it right now without looking through these shades, it's extremely painful and you immediately want to stop. My guess at what's going on here. First of all, I think the people who said there were no clouds were not correct. There are a couple of reports from Fatima, not the majority, but some, where they say they saw it through light clouds. I think probably it was so rainy all day that when the majority of these very dark clouds parted, people weren't noticing that there was a tiny veil of little light cirrus clouds still over the sun. Second thing is, according to my optical physics consultant, Claude, moisture lingering in the atmosphere after a heavy rainstorm actually adds a lot of optical depth, which means that you are seeing the sun much dimmer than you would otherwise be. So even though they were seeing it at midday through what didn't look like there were many clouds, they could have actually been seeing it through many layers of light cloud and moisture that could have gotten the sun within this 10,000 nit range that I think can produce the miracle. So I'm not too bothered by that one. The spinning, again, can't necessarily explain that with my theory, although I have some leads. The heat. Some people say that the miracle miraculously dried their sopping wet clothes. That wouldn't make sense under my theory, but it is mostly in one book of testimonies by one guy who is kind of a leading interviewer, so I'm not that concerned about that one. The people who say the sun fell towards Earth. So about 10 or 20% of witnesses said that they saw the sun suddenly drop from the sky and fall to Earth as if it was about to crush them before returning back up to the sky. 20% is a very odd number of people to see the sun fall from the sky. Usually you expect that to be either 0% or 100%. My guess at what's going on there, two things. Number one, there's an illusion called the autokinetic effect, where if you are looking at a single point on an otherwise featureless visual field, your brain gets confused and just randomly re-rolls what depth it decides to perceive it at every so often. Second thing is, if the sun was in fact behind these very light clouds, you can imagine maybe the light clouds parted for a second, in which case the sun would suddenly be 100 times brighter, and if you didn't think there were any clouds to begin with, you might interpret that as the sun suddenly starting to come closer to you. Visions of the Virgin Mary. Again, about 10% of people at Fatima say that in addition to the sun doing weird things, they saw visions in the sky. These were often the Virgin Mary, but some people saw Saint Joseph. Questioner last time asked, how did they know it was Saint Joseph in particular? I have no idea. They saw Christ or various religious figures. At the Buddhist version, some people claim to have seen the monk Luang Pu Sod, who was, I guess, associated with this cult. Why? I'm not sure. Obviously, no optical or physical scenario can fully explain this. My guess is, I don't know, if you're seeing a miracle, maybe you just add in other miracles. Like, I realize that sounds dismissive, but I think there's a supportive literature from the eyewitness to crimes literature where people who have seen a crime often just hallucinate seeing other things also. So for example, there are some studies where people ask about car accidents, like, where was the broken glass? And a car accident eyewitness will describe it, and in fact, there was no broken glass. Or there's a famous example where a terrorist entered a subway station and stabbed some people. There were many eyewitnesses. Many of the eyewitnesses say they saw the terrorist kind of cinematically jump over the turnstile. In fact, the terrorist had very politely used his existing subway card to get into the station, but people just thought, like, the way a crime should go is that the terrorist is doing crazy stuff like jumping the turnstile. I wonder if it's possible that if you've already seen a miracle where the sun changes color and spins in the sky, maybe your brain is just willing to add some extra details like the Virgin Mary. I'm not sure. This is a flaw in my theory. Finally, the advanced prediction. These children said 6 months earlier that it would happen. Is this implausible? It's definitely implausible for the people who say that this was a sundog or an aureole or the aurora or a meteor. How bad is it for me? I think not so bad. Again, we saw this after 2 days in Medjugorje. Presumably this happens in Medjugorje more often, which is why it's the place that's famous for having this happen. But I think the sun, like at least in places that have very dynamic weather, where there's often lots of rain, lots of weird clouds, I think the sun is in this band pretty often. Like it could be as often as like once every few days or few weeks. And I do have some circumstantial evidence for this, which is, this is a journal from the New Orleans, this is an article from the New Orleans Journal of Medicine, where a guy went on pilgrimage to Medjugorje, injured his eyes, went to an ophthalmologist, I don't know, gave him some kind of help, and then he reported that back home in New Orleans, he saw the miracle again. Presumably, my guess about what happened is he'd gone to Medjugorje, he'd stared at the sun because everyone said there if you did it, you would see a miracle. He did see the miracle. He thought, wow, this is pretty cool. Then he went home. He was like, I wonder if staring at the sun here, I can also see a miracle. He tried staring at the sun in Louisiana, and he could see it there. And he'd just never considered this before, but it's just pretty common in all of these different places. Having read this, when I came home from Medjugorje, I was pretty excited about seeing whether I could see this from Oakland. Luckily, this was still within our short rainy season, and about 2 weeks after we got home, I did see the same conditions. I called my wife out, and she did see the miracle again. This is a picture while it was happening from our backyard. Again, the sun is kind of behind a tree because this mostly happens when the sun is quite low in the sky. So I guess we can now just see it whenever the sun is within this brightness band, which is pretty neat. So I'll end this discussion with 2 quotes. Eliezer Yudkowsky, I consider the present game board to look incredibly grim. I don't see a way out through hard work alone. We can only hope there's a miracle that violates some aspect of my background model and try to prepare for that unknown miracle. Second quote, Lemony Snicket. Miracles are like pimples. Once you start looking for them, you find more than you ever dreamed you'd see. Thank you. Any questions? All right, if no one else is going to handle the questions, I'll just call on people whose hands are raised. Yes, Debbie.
I'm curious, have you looked at whether this would be possible to replicate indoors under laboratory conditions?
So we actually talked about this. Yes, she asked whether we could find it indoors in laboratory conditions. So I gave the same talk at Less Online, and we had a good discussion of this. It might potentially be difficult because the sky has a quality called optical depth, which is very hard to replicate. There are some technologies that can replicate it, and I think it was Rob Miles pointed out that some YouTuber had found some cheap way to replicate this with like a large tank of water or something. So in theory, we could probably try this. However, it would necessarily have to involve staring at lights that are very painful and damaging to stare at. So the chance that this gets through an IRB is pretty low. It may be more of a job for mad science than for regular science. Yes, with the blue hair.
Yes. I noticed that right now you're wearing transition lenses.
Yes.
And were you and your wife wearing similar or different eyewears during these
I was wearing this at the time. You don't have transition lenses, right?
Not right now, no. I did not have transition lenses
Yeah.
at the time.
So
I
I
might
did
have
take
taken my glasses off. I don't remember.
I did take my glasses off to see if that changed anything, but then like I just saw a blurry thing. It could have been spinning miraculously, might not have been just a blur. Yes.
It seems like this whole Medjugorje saga started with like a completely sun unrelated thing, which is like a child seeing a ghost at night. So like, what's going on?
Great question. You should read this book, My Heart Will Triumph, by the woman. So Fatima also started with these children seeing the Virgin Mary. Marian apparitions are quite weird. They often strike children. The children are not necessarily that religious beforehand. They often strike a large group of children at once. It was 3 children at Fatima, it was 6 at Medjugorje. All of the children always say they see the same thing. All of the children always stick to it. Often they happen in like communist or otherwise anti-religious countries where the authorities are like, recant or we'll kill you. The children never recant. So it's quite surprising. Matthew, who goes by Bentham's Bulldog online, who I think is here, has written some things about this. There's a good literature about it on Substack. One somewhat relevant fact is that the Virgin Mary often gives these children prophecies. The prophecies are often false. So what is going on here? I don't know. I'm fascinated by it. Another thing I found fascinating about this book is that a large part of it is her talking about how depressed she is all the time she's not seeing the Virgin Mary. Apparently this is like a peak experience where you like get a taste of heaven on earth, and once the Virgin stopped appearing to her as often, she just fell into a deep depression which she barely survived, and a lot of the book is about how she coped with that. This to me is not what I would make up if I were making something up. So I don't know, whatever your usual beliefs are about like prophetic religious experiences, this needs to fit in there because it's a pretty weird one and it happens surprisingly often. I don't have a great explanation for it. I would recommend this book. I would recommend the growing Substack literature on Marian apparitions. Thank you. Yes.
Just to throw on that, I do think kids are kind of easy mode for mass
Hold
hallucinations or
on.
something.
Give a
But,
sec.
yeah.
Yeah, she was just saying that kids are easy mode for mass hallucinations. I kind of agree with that, but
Especially
if-
girls' schools for some reason.
yes, if you read this story, her claim was that none of these kids coordinated on this beforehand. I don't know, either that's false or there's something extremely weird going on. Yes.
Is there anything special about the eyes of children that might cause them to be more attuned to these conditions where like adults could only see it if they were actually paying attention?
So I want to clarify, the children see the Virgin Mary. They do not necessarily see the sun miracle any more than adults. Yes.
With regards to the landscape changing colors.
Yes.
So what's the explanation of why the landscape changing colors all seem to end concurrently? If it's like they damage their eyes, you should expect that to last different amounts of time. So it would be weird if it all ended concurrently.
I have no evidence that it actually all ended concurrently. I mean, we don't have evidence either way. There isn't anybody writing, I checked and he was still seeing different colors at the same time long after I had stopped it. There wasn't anybody saying the opposite. My guess is that these people are all staring at the sun about the same time. And then, like, let's say 5 or 10 minutes after they start staring at the sun, they see the landscape changing color, and then the sun actually comes out from behind its clouds and is outside this brightness range, so the miracle stops. And about a minute or two after people stop staring at the sun, they stop seeing these color changes because their eyes have recovered and they're no longer damaging them by staring at the sun. Yes?
How do you contextualize this into kind of your larger understanding of the world? I think I would assume the reason why you investigated this in large part is just outside of the individual phenomenon being pretty interesting and the graph you plotted, that this helps us understand society or kind of some
No,
broad...
not really.
Okay.
I just thought it was, like I said, I thought it was extremely weird that there was this miracle 100,000 people saw. Yes?
On the same line, why do you think that it took you to do this? Are there not enough miracle debunkers in the world? Or
So
is it
I should
because a lot of-
clarify, my theory for why this happened is like the 101st. There are 100 other theories. I presented some of them and why I don't like them. I like my own theory. I'm sure all of these 100 other people like their theories and hate mine. There have been some people who have done some like pretty involved work on this before. There was a Marian apparition associated with sun miracles in Conyers, Georgia, about 20 or 30 years ago. A skeptic society went there with a telescope, looked at the sun at the time through a normal solar telescope, obviously didn't see anything. I think this was more of a stunt than anything else, but sure. There were a lot of skeptics who have worked on this. They've done great work. I like my explanation better. There is something I think I have which most other people didn't, which is access to the internet and to AI. I think my research, like many people, their research on this has been extremely superficial, but I think that's because they were writing in 1990 or something, where you could only do research by like going to the Vatican Library and getting their books about this. I was very lucky to have access to the Substack community, which surfaced a lot of very interesting things. One thing was the Buddhist version of the miracle, which I think nobody had connected to Fatima until one guy on Substack called Arthur did that like 3 months ago. Another thing was the fire Kashina connection, which I think probably was a red herring, but was interesting enough that I'm glad someone pointed that out. Finally, somebody pointed out a very similar miracle where in 1979, approximately everyone in Iran saw Ayatollah Khomeini's face on the moon. There was just a thing where one night somebody looked up and was like, look, the Ayatollah's face is on the moon. And then everybody looked and they all saw it and it was in newspapers the next day and it was a big deal. And this has apparently just been completely memory holed because who wants to hear about Ayatollah Khomeini's face being on the moon? It's too weird. But it was a very big thing in Iran in the 1970s. That one is, I don't know, that was, like, I guess that was a mass hallucination. I kind of want to say it's just like, yeah, there's a man in the moon. Everyone sees it. If you're thinking really hard about Ayatollah Khomeini, maybe it looks like him. But I have tried looking at the moon and trying to see various people's faces there. And I was like, no, it's obviously the man in the moon. So I have no idea what was going on there. Richard Hanania has an interesting take on this. He is of Palestinian descent, and I think he knew a lot of people who were like very poor and religious and fanatical in Palestine. And he just said, yeah, people are like this. Portuguese people in 1917, they're probably illiterate, superstitious peasants. Palestinians now, Iranians in the 1970s, superstitious, illiterate peasants will see anything. You tell them there's a miracle, they'll see it. I don't really know if this is true. There's like a little bit of literature that maybe it is. You have the Julian Jaynes book about like all of these people who used to see and talk to spirits very easily. I don't know how true any of that is, but I guess you need something like that to explain the Virgin Mary visions that people had at the time, so that may be another part of the puzzle. Yes?
Have you looked at the other examples of sun miracles and see if the geography or weather conditions line up with...
So the weather conditions often do. Almost all of the biggest examples of people seeing this, Nekeda, GI in Italy where 400,000 people saw it, the Buddhist version, Fatima, all are, One of my favorite examples, on the 100th anniversary of Fatima, there was a commemoration in Nigeria where 100,000 people went to this, I think, stadium to have a priest give a speech in honor of the 100th anniversary, and they saw the miracle again. So all of these examples were on very rainy days where the clouds very briefly parted and you could just get a glimpse of the sun through a window in the clouds. The one we saw was not like that. The Medjugorje ones don't seem to be these rainy days. My guess is that there are two ways you can get these brightness conditions. One is a rainy day at noon where the clouds very briefly part. The other is evening with a certain type of kind of light cirrus cloud low on the horizon. So in Medjugorje, we saw the light cirrus clouds. Most of the really big, exciting examples where they see the full thing with the spinning and the color changes are on very rainy days where the clouds briefly part. All right, we're out of time. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions over there or somewhere.